Welcome into another episode of the Young Terps podcast. Ahmed Kafir and Mason Viner. Ahmed, almost time for the Christmas music, but to Maryland fans, Maryland basketball is our version of it. Terps get it started with a win over, I guess they call it the Mount now, but I'll use their actual name, Mount St. Mary's. Maryland tops them 68-53 in the opener.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, it was a good chance. I think a lot of fans were obviously looking forward to this day one to just kind of kick off year two of the Kevin Willard era, but then also be able to watch the return of Jameer Young, Julian Reese, see how he progresses, and then of course the debut of the freshman Sean Harris-Smith, Jamie Kaiser Jr. I got to see a little bit of John Lamoth on Tuesday night as well, but as you mentioned, we're able to coast away with the 15-point win in the last home game for 2 more weeks.
Yeah, so sort of a strange feeling last night. Just the season starts. You're used to these long stretches of kind of home opponents at the level of a Mount St. Mary's, at the level of that tier CAA type teams that come into Xfinity early in the season. But it almost felt like you're going to get started. Yeah, the games will be on TV this weekend, but nearly it's like it gets started and it stops because there isn't another game at home for so long. But ultimately, I think the freshman stole the show last night.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think the freshman. I think Sean Harris-Smith. I think it was pretty easy for him to kind of just go notice. Obviously, just being able to record 2 steals, a block in the first 5 minutes of the game. Finished four for six from the field. The lone 2 misses were from 3-point land, and was able to. I think it was even a 1 or 2 plays where the I think it was Julian Reese was called for an offensive foul, and DHS was still able to kind of knock down a fluid mid range, even though the basket didn't count. So I think he just again he looked really good as advertised. I think every Maryland fan kind of expected him to be that bona fide starter to kind of solidify that backcourt alongside Jameer Young, but thought he was able to get a little bit comfortable offensively. Obviously, kicked off the scoring with that putback around the rim, but again, it was just kind of defensively for him to kind of leave his mark like that in game one. I thought was probably more impressive.
Yeah, and I thought Jamie Kaiser Jr. also just looked really impressive. Obviously, talk about the shape that DHS and Jamie Kaiser Jr. are in coming into it. They both look like legitimate Big Ten players right off the bat. And again, as advertised, the mid-range game showing obviously not as many minutes, not as many highlight plays, but overall really, really solid-looking players that look like they're ready to compete in Big Ten basketball.
Yeah, I actually thought to myself when Kaiser, when he hit that first three and he did that little celebration, I wondered, how because it seemed like he was definitely he was ready to pull that out. So I think a lot of fans obviously just got excited when they see that, just especially for that to be his first shot. I think a lot of fans kind of look at him and potentially Noah Bachelor to be that guy off the bench, but to really provide Maryland with that perimeter scoring and obviously did not go well yesterday, finishing 3 of 16 from the field, 1 of 7 in the second half there. But think Jamie Kaiser for him to kind of kick off his career with that. Hopefully, is a good sign of things to come.
Yeah, it sure is. And then down low for the Terps, they add quite a bit, and just looked like Julian Reese. Again, the body transformation over his time at Maryland, and obviously his inside scoring shows. But again, the foul trouble, but Maryland with some added depth this year down low.
Yeah, and I think like you said, obviously I think Julian Reese looked just very fluid around the rim, looked very comfortable, confident. The free throw shooting from Reese, I think that's going to be something that was, a little bit of a red flag, a little bit of a concern to see yesterday. If you take away his free throw shooting, the team shot 80% from the line, but with Julian 68%, Julian finished 2 of 7 from the free throw line there. So I think that's obviously one thing that you kind of hope you get a chance to kind of see him create more consistency just through non-conference play before Big Ten play, obviously. But again, Jordan Geronimo and only finished with one shot there, 2 points. And Willard kind of talked about that post game. That's kind of what he expected, and he mentioned, this is really the first time Maryland's had a full roster. Obviously, Caleb Swanton, Roger, Noah Bachelor, Jahari Long, all those guys back on the court. But Jordan Geronimo just kind of getting him to kind of mesh him and Dante on the floor. When Dante came back, he was a guy that has that ability to play the three just with his inside out scoring ability and his ball handling. So just kind of maybe creating some of that balance between them, figuring out how to play together. I mentioned going into the season opener. One thing to watch is just to see how these guys kind of play together on the court, get that feel, get these rotations down, and that's another thing we've talked about. So, I think right now Maryland's going to try and figure out how to play together, obviously, and I think this weekend will give them a chance to do that. But when you mentioned Jordan Geronimo, what he's able to do, filling in that for that Patrick Emilian role, definitely a guy where you're able to kind of see the added physicality that he brings, especially on the defensive end there, coming down with 5 rebounds in 17 minutes. So, definitely some confidence. It ended up being Jordan Geronimo who drew the start as that fifth starter over Jamie Kaiser Jr.
Yeah, definitely like it. Very physical down low for the Terps, and they'll need those. They'll need the fouls, the physical play come conference time. To have Scott, to have Geronimo, and to have Reese out there really gives Maryland a legitimate size in the lineup. Obviously, it was as clear as day a first game of the season, trying the different lineup combos, seeing the bench go so deep. We'll see over time kind of where Willard lands, but immediately they roll into a test this weekend in Asheville with Davidson, and then we'll see who the second opponent is, but possibly a Power 6 opponent, and really an opportunity to see where they are early season in the next 3 games.
Yeah, I think really the big thing about this weekend, I think Maryland they should match up kind of well against Davidson, but again, I think what fans are kind of looking for this weekend. I think the obvious thing is, one, you kind of want to be able to find some success and just show signs of being able to create some perimeter scoring. Again, 316. You kind of think about Julian Reese just kind of being able to do what he did inside and the efficiency that he's able to play with. You kind of expect him to kind of control the game, but the 3-point shooting, those are things that you're able to detect regardless of the competition level. So that's one thing that I kind of want to see Maryland be able to do this weekend, just to show that Jamie Kaiser, Noah Batchelor, Matty Traore, who doesn't, I think his role is going to be a little bit limited, especially by the time conference play rolls around. But he's a guy, he looks like he has a pretty smooth stroke as well. But again, Jameer Young, you kind of want some of these guys that are scorers to be able to provide that. So I think that's one. But then the biggest thing is, again, just being able to play 2 games in 3 days for a roster that, one, has a lot of new pieces trying to play together, figure each other out, and then 2, a lot of young guys. I think an early season test like that, for your second and third game to have to go into a Friday game, prepare on Saturday, go into a Sunday game. I just think that getting into that rhythm will kind of help them. And then, like you said, just being able to play a Power 6 opponent and potentially your third game of the season, I think gives Maryland a good barometer to see, just what this team kind of looks like. I think everyone kind of knows what you're expecting from Jameer Young, from Julian Reese, from Dante Scott. But again, just kind of how do the parts come together as a whole? I think that's what we'll be able to see this weekend.
Yeah, I think that covers it. Terps obviously with some challenging games this weekend, some chances to get, it's never too early to start talking about those quad. I guess these will be probably a 3 and maybe a 1, 2, meaningful early season wins that go on the resume in March, an opportunity to pick up a pair of them this weekend in Asheville and get some early season hardware.
Yeah, and I think kind of creating some momentum before that daunting road game at Villanova, I think is a chance for Maryland as well. So it's a going to be a weird home slate, but definitely a slate that Maryland will be able to test themselves. So we'll see how they turn out.
Yeah, seeing some like NBA Finals pricing if for those of you that want to try and pick up some second hand tickets for that Villanova game. They're up above like the 350 mark right now for next Friday. That's what doing word on the street is they won that game at Wells Fargo. That's what playing that game in a 4,500 seat stadium will do for Villanova. But yeah, if you want to get in, not a cheap ticket next Friday.
No, definitely not. But it'll be a fun one to watch. Former Terp Akeem Hart take on his former team. So we shall see how it turns out.
Yeah, let's flip over to football now. Maryland heads to Lincoln, their second trip to Nebraska, third conference meeting between the two. Ahmed, time for some soul searching for the boys in College Park.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably probably your most winnable game of the three left. I was a little bit surprised. Obviously, Maryland opened up as a slight favorite on the road, but I mean, it's been weeks now since Maryland has won. Since September 30th was that last win. Maryland, I think, just kind of needs to be able to get back in that win column. Obviously, with the huge Michigan game to close out the home slate the weekend after, but just for Maryland to kind of get back into their winning ways. Maryland has not been able to do well against Nebraska. I think that it's a combined 84-14 in the two matchups between these two teams. So, Maryland will be able to need to figure out a way, especially offensively, to kind of get it going. But it'll be interesting. I think Maryland does match up favorably in some spots.
Yeah, and let's start off Matt Rule in his first season in Lincoln. And immediately one thing that's shown for Coach Rule and has shown at every single one of his stops is the ability to quickly turn around the defensive side of the ball. The Huskers been able to play some defense this year. And look, the thing that pops out to me, 28 sacks on the season. They get after the passer. They stop the run. And really a team that Maryland is going to have to limit the errors again in this Nebraska defense. Definitely the strength of what Matt Rule's got going on.
Yeah, and I think I don't think there are too many fans that want to remember just how many rushing yards Maryland had against Penn State. It wasn't much, but you kind of look at this Nebraska team, and they sit second in the conference, and with allowing 77 yards on the ground per game, and frankly, Maryland has not been able to create much consistency at all on the ground, and I think this game you're not really going into it expecting to create that balance. I think what Maryland needs to do is kind of figure out a way to get those skill players the ball in space when the screen ball and the screen pays, or just getting your receivers the ball out in the perimeter. I think those are kind of the ways to do it because, again, like we said, this Nebraska defense is legit. Lincoln is going to be a tough place to play, and they do a good job of getting back to the quarterback, Isaac Gifford, Luke Ramier, all the Jamari Butler, all three of those guys. Integral pieces in that front seven there. So Maryland's going to have to figure out, get hats on hats there, and I think the success is going to have to come through the air.
Yeah, I think that's really the only thing that you can lean on at this point with this offense, and when it matches up against a defense like this, again, a team that has played well against every opponent other than Colorado and Michigan. This year, Colorado puts 36 up against them in the second game of the season. Michigan comes back a couple weeks later and puts up only 45. And really for that Wolverines team right now, regardless of all the nonsense that's going on in the background with them, 45 points for them has been, it took them a while to get started in that game. And J.J. McCarthy really just took over in the second half of that game and started to dominate through the air. Maryland has got to find a way to bring back some of the stuff we found early in the season, the extensions of the running games, the pop passes on the inside, getting lateral movement, the inside flip plays to Corey Dyches that we saw early in the season. Find ways to extend the running game outside of the screen game. We saw early in Loxley's career a lot of swing motion to get the running backs the ball out on the edges. Where are some of these plays right now in our play sets? Is kind of where I'm lost with this team, but I would love to see it come back. I liked the impact that Octavian Smith had on Saturday as far as the offense goes. He's the perfect player for that. Also, I see it, down our list, Ahmed, and your keys to the game. Find a way to get Corey Dyches involved, even if it is those inside shoulder passes. Get some of these guys that have been injured, some touches early in the game, just to feel like they're back somewhat normal in sequence. This is very much a tempo-led offense with a quarterback that gets jittery. I think Loxley's pretty much said that at this point with his comments after the Penn State game. Find a way to find rhythm and use your short passing game to create a sense of normalcy in terms of maybe being able to find something in the running game, but at least getting comfortable as far as our quarterbacking goes.
Yeah, exactly that. And you mentioned Corey Dyches there, and I just think kind of with that versatility and that explosiveness that Nebraska kind of brings in the front seven. Obviously, Maryland didn't do a great job kind of keeping Talia upright last week, and Cam Lenhart, he was the guy who Maryland ended up finishing second for out of high school, and he was kind of he's been able to do a little bit in that front seven as well, just getting being a disruptive force for that Huskers front seven. But you think of Talia, obviously. what he's been able to kind of do. Obviously, starting out the game last week with 17 consecutive completions, but it's all about finding a groove. And I think Corey Dyches, he's a guy, he's a dependable target. I think even with drops looming so large in some critical moments for Maryland this year, I think Corey Dyches has kind of been able to prove that he's that reliable target over the middle. So I think he's a guy that I think can kind of take advantage. But again, I mentioned the drops, the wide receivers this game, Ty Felton, Deshaun Jones, Caden Prather, all three of them have had those key drops in these critical situations. And I think Nebraska, we'll talk about it, but I think Nebraska offensively is a big challenge. So I think if Maryland is able to kind of capitalize on just even one of these plays, I think that could end up being the difference in this one. But then again, you want to look at just kind of being able to, just generate turnovers. Obviously, Nebraska is among the worst teams in the country in the turnover margin, and Nebraska has had 22 turnovers turned into 50 points against them. And you just kind of, again, you look at the last 3 weeks, what has not gone well for Maryland, and the turnover margin has been an error, or has been a concern in each of those losses. So especially on the road in a hostile environment, expected hostile environment, that's where Maryland's going to have to be able to just generate these momentum plays.
Yeah, and that's something when you reflect back on the past couple of weeks where things have gone wrong. The turnover margins, like the eyesore on the stat sheet. Some of these games, stat wise, even the Penn State game, up until the wheels came off the bus and the turnovers came in, stat wise, the rushing yards and the turnover, and then it was a turnover margin. When it was just the rushing yards, you find yourself down 16, 15, points in a game. When you start the turnover margin, that's where you end up losing the game by 40 and 50 points eventually, and you spiral into what we've seen in the past. And really right now, our defense is the one that is searching for it. Our, offensive errors are going to happen against good defensive teams, especially when your defense can't generate any sort of momentum plays, whether those be, fourth down stops. We've seen that against now Northwestern, Penn State, and Illinois. Turnovers, I believe the Illinois game was the last turnover that Maryland has forced.
Yeah, I believe so. Actually, I don't have that set in front of me off the top, but yeah, Northwestern there wasn't one, and obviously Penn State. Yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. But I mean, you even look at last week. You kind of, granted, Penn State was still able to kind of largely control that first half, but the turnovers once they started in the second half, that's when the score started, running up, and Maryland kind of squandered, maybe that brief chance that they had to kind of cut into the lead. So yeah, the turnovers there, being able to obviously for Talia to kind of take care of the football, and for the receivers, these just the locks you talked about. Ty Felton, his fumble being a byproduct of a vice tackle, and those are tackles that we work on in practice. So just the small mental things, I think. I know it's easy to say, but those are really going to be the difference. I mean, if Maryland doesn't have those type of fumbles, those type of plays, this is the type of Nebraska team that you're able to win. But that's why Terps versus Terps and standard and all that's unfortunately why it exists, because if Maryland just does what we expect them and what they've shown us through the first half of the season, then they should be able to come away with the road win.
Yeah, at some point, you really do start to, and look, Locks, in all fairness, he said it all the time with his Terps versus Terps, but it really just is a reflection of however you want to phrase it, looking within and seeing if you can control the controllable things. And, for Leah, that's not dropping the ball 2 weeks in a row. I mean, he basically did it again, just dropped the ball when he's opening up to pass, when he's under pressure, dropping his eyes against the rush, something that, I said when he first started that he looks down at the rush, and a lot of people called me crazy. And now here we are 4 years into it, and the coach is saying it. It's all those little controllable things that, rhythm plays happen, but you almost week over week look at it and you're like, the defense, somebody needs to come out and make a big play just to change everyone's mindset. And with that, let's talk about a Nebraska offense that probably will give Maryland's defense chances to make those big plays. A team that loves to run the ball, obviously picked up a quarterback that the Terps once chased after, and started off the season with that, and just not necessarily the best team at moving the football, Ahmed.
Yeah, Heinrich Harburg is kind of taking over at quarterback there, and he's been a big asset on the run. Anthony Grant another guy that's kind of been able to kind of make the rushing attack for Nebraska go, lead the Big Ten with 186 yards on the ground. This Marcus Satterfield offense, though, is again, it's not pretty. The Satterfield, the former South Carolina offense coordinator, took the offensive coordinator job with Nebraska, joined Rule last offseason, and again, just the passing attack has kind of struggled. I mean, if you look at the Big Ten stats, there isn't a Nebraska wideout, tight end that sits in the top 25 in receptions, receiving yards. Vertically they're challenged, and I think that's kind of where Maryland's able to kind of step up. So again, when you kind of look at Maryland and kind of slowing down Nebraska, it's going to start with limiting the run, getting hats on hats, and kind of winning the front seven there. You look at 2 weeks ago against Northwestern, Maryland finished with a season high 16 missed tackles. So again, this is kind of that emphasis where Maryland needs to just, once they make contact, bring down either Grant or Heinberg, excuse me. But again, I think it kind of sits within that front seven in order to stop Nebraska's rushing attack, and I think if Maryland's able to do so, again, this Nebraska team might not be able to score a ton.
Yeah, you mentioned a passing offense that struggles 13th in the conference on that. They allow a lot of sacks, 24 sacks allowed by the Cornhusker team, 19.9 points per game, and really everything would be lining up for it to be really easy for Maryland to be favored by a touchdown or 5 points. It's on the road; you always have to factor that in. But with everything that's going on right now, in the ability to make quarterbacks look great that we all know aren't necessarily at that level, leaves many people, nationally and locally that cover this team very uninspired. And I think that might be the case this weekend. There's really nothing that Maryland has done over the past couple of weeks that would make you think that, Herrenberg won't have a career day, won't have almost a game that looks like he's turning the page on his career. What I would like to see in terms of keys to the game is really Glenn Miller playing the nickelback and maybe even Avante Williams getting some chance at the nickelback. It's been all season. This has been a question mark for us. We've talked about it in this show repeatedly. At this point, the best 11 need to play constantly. I'm not saying you can't rotate at all. That doesn't exist on defense, but we saw the 5-man front come into play last week with Ty Johnson going to the defensive end position. I think that needs to remain in order to stop the run. And ultimately, unfortunately, a safety corner hybrid has shown himself to be one of the best pass defenders that this team has. And this is now must win. There's not, I don't think you can really go into this game for Loxley saying that Rutgers is the same old walkover that they've been at the end of the season.
Yeah. No,
this
definitely.
really feels like it is the moment for possibly, I'm not going to say Loxley's program because he just got a contract extension, but it sure feels like the fan support of, possibly booing the team against Michigan, starts to come into factor. Everything, the floodgates have opened now. It's really up to this team to trust in their coaches, trust in what they've been doing, and come out there and show everybody that this isn't the same old Maryland team that's going to fold, and that the standard does mean something. Everything that they've been saying has some sort of meaning to it, and they can show up and win this game.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. I mean, again, I think, that this is, I think everyone, kind of looks at this season as, obviously a chance to, win 8, maybe 9 games. And, is this a year that Maryland's able to take down one of the Big Ten elites? And obviously, Maryland wasn't able to do that. And, the last couple of weeks, I think it's, not just the results, it's how they lost. And I think that's kind of why fan support feels, I feel it. It feels like it's dwindling in half week by week. I know that sounds exaggerated, but it's just kind of just feels like kind of everything's continuing to mount negatively against this program right now. And when you mentioned, just being able to take on this Nebraska team that they really have not been competitive with. And I think the 2019 loss, I think that was a little bit concerning because it was year one, and Scott Frost and Locke, both in year one, but now it's year 5. You're on the road going into the season. I mentioned this potentially could be the highest scoring game in the Big Ten this season, and Nebraska offensively is kind of struggled offensively for Maryland. They have kind of been inconsistent, but again, like you mentioned, this weekend is a chance for Maryland to get back on track, to get that 6th win, and just right the ship to kind of get back in the winning ways and feel that, even though you feel like you're doing everything right Monday through Friday, the result isn't coming on Saturday. I think just for Maryland to be able to do that on Saturday, I think that'll be a big thing. And again, going to a bowl game and securing that, I think will kind of ease some of the concerns there. And we can talk about the what ifs and all that after the fact. But again, I think when you look at just what Nebraska presents offensively and defensively, this is a team where Maryland matches up well. And sure, Nebraska, their rushing attack, they could magnify some of Maryland's uh, their shortcomings these last couple of weeks. Some weaknesses that maybe we didn't expect that hadn't come up, they have come up. So I think this is a chance for Maryland to be able to quell those and again pick up that sixth win that fans thought they'd see about a month ago.
Yeah, speaking of that, all that being said, the Terps still a 2.5-point favorite across the board. Over under set at 44. Ahmed, your prediction?
Yeah, don't me Nebraska with plus 2.5. I think Nebraska at home. I think that's kind of the difference, but I'm going to go slightly over that over under. I know it went under last week, and then Penn State almost hit the over by themselves. So really appreciate that, James Franklin. But again, I just think I think I'm kind of in that boat where Maryland's going to have to prove it. And again, Maryland, they do match up well, but just going to need to see this Maryland team need to pull out the win. And again, if they're able to do that, then they're able to reinforce that maybe this Maryland team is getting back to what we thought they were beginning of the season.
Yeah, call me a man that lacks logic, but the white Terps helmets are back, and that's got me picking Maryland. This game it belongs on Peacock. I'll put it that way. This is not a game that I think many people will really want to watch. I'm taking the over too. I just don't believe in Maryland's defense. Honestly, Nebraska, this game might be like 7-3 going into somewhere like in the middle of the third quarter. And then I just see somehow both teams playing awful, but it amounting to many points, similar to a late season NFL game between two teams that have like 3 wins. That's what we're going to see. But one team will walk away bowl eligible.
Yeah, it's you gotta kind of respect Matt Rule. Obviously, the season didn't start out well for them, and then they're able to before that Michigan State loss last week, winners of their last 3, winners of 5 of the last 6. So definitely. I'm not going to say it should be an exciting game, but it should be an interesting game.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned the environment, and I wouldn't be surprised. Look, I was at Nebraska the last time Maryland played there, and that was like the end of the Mike Riley Nebraska era. Maryland was coming in. Max Bortenschlager got his first start as the Maryland quarterback that day, and it wasn't necessarily loud, but there were certainly 85,000 people in that stadium, and it does get loud when they make big plays. You just have to remember going into this program was in a bad spot. Rule is now started to stack wins up. There's a lot of excitement there. Given that they've had to reduce the capacity of the stadium, or they just announced a project to do that to maintain their sellout streak, still one of the tougher places to play in this country, and still would be a good win for Maryland as a program to say, hey, we went to Nebraska and won a game. That still means a lot to a lot of people that watched football in the 80s, the 90s, into the early 2000s. I mean, it's still a box that Maryland is yet to check. And the last time we played this team, you have to remember the score is 54-3 on our field, and they were 4-8 that year, I believe, and we were 3-9. So still, you got to take the opportunities when you get them to go into these places and win games on the road. We haven't proven that we haven't been able to do that, so maybe we right the ship this weekend.
We'll see. We'll see. Definitely, you mentioned just Nebraska, Maryland historically being a program like Nebraska. I think that'd be cool. And again, just picking up that first win, picking up that win in Lincoln Memorial Stadium, I think would be big, but obviously just a much needed win before these last 2 games of the regular season.
Yeah, let's go inside the bag. We're going to change our recruiting segment name back over to what used to be our recruiting show, which is Inside the Bag. So, Ahmed, let's go inside the bag. We'll start it off. The news that everybody wants to hear, what is going on with Derek Queen?
Yeah, today was obviously day 1 of the early signing period. Obviously, ever since that Maryland official visit in late October. That was expected to be the last visit, and him and his camp were expected to kind of bunker down and decide. A lot of people were kind of looking at this day, obviously with Montverde, obviously their players signing in their NLIs on the first day possible. Some kind of expected or maybe pegged this day as the day that Derek Queen would probably formally announce, or there would be some clarity. But Wednesday has almost come and gone now. There's still no certainty as to when he will officially sign, whether there's a commitment ceremony, whatnot. That's still all very much fluid. And Maryland still remains in that picture, obviously, just battling Indiana, Houston, and Kansas, and rounding out that top group. But until then, it still remains a waiting game. It seems like there's a lot of buzz, a lot of talk that Maryland's kind of the team that is most maybe best positioned, just kind of with everything, the way that they've been recruiting. Willard's emphasis on kind of connecting with Queen's camp, and the proximity to home. Maryland's done a really good job, obviously, with Derek Queen, his relationships with people within the program. But Indiana, it seems like, is the school that's doing everything they can in the 11th hour to just give themselves one last chance or try and turn the tide. So until then, it is status quo. But again, it's supposed to decide our update on inside the black and gold. The expectation still remains coming out of Wednesday that Queen does pull the trigger, that he does ultimately do sign in the early signing period. So again, now we just wait to see when that is.
Yeah, I mean, I heard similar last night at Xfinity. Just obviously, it's a topic that everybody wants to hear about. Is Maryland's competitive in every way in this recruiting battle? It is a battle. Indiana is really trying to come in at the 11th hour, and there's a lot of people kind of that give you the shrug of the shoulders with this one, just like they don't really know when it's coming. It's coming. The expectation, like as you had in your VIP notes, is it's sometime in this early signing window.
Yeah.
Unless something really affects it, like a suitor kind of comes out of nowhere that really throws their name in the hat that's worthwhile, but that seems unlikely at this point. Maryland's competitive across the board in terms of everything that goes into this, and is definitely spent the time building the relationship over years now. It's a matter of when, and it's kind of nobody knows exactly where the kid's head's at, but he's got a lot of great opportunities for him. And at this point, NIL wise, can't make a poor decision. And now it's really comes down to where he wants to play basketball.
Yeah, exactly that. I think, Maryland, from their perspective, they kind of checked every single box. And, that when I posted this a couple of times and really felt like ever since Kevin Willard arrived as the head coach at Maryland, it felt like Derek Queen and getting him and like that felt like obviously it was always a top priority. And obviously, you look at Deshaun Harris-Smith, he was a signature. And I think I think every fan expects him, when all said and done, to be that impact signee for Maryland, that impact player for Maryland. Jamie Kaiser is another guy, but it feels like Derek Queen has been the guy. Jameer Young, Maryland was able to get him out of the transfer portal, and that was, the first big splash for Kevin Willard. But just Derek Queen has always been kind of a top priority for Maryland. And, obviously when Maryland went through the coaching transition in the spring with losing Tavon Sadler and most importantly losing Tony Skinn, they did a really good job. Obviously just had great connections, ties into St. Francis, into Team Thrill. So just Maryland's done a really good job kind of making sure that there was no real drop-off. David Cox, I mean, it was a collective effort, but obviously David Cox leading. But again, I'd heard from Queen's camp a couple of times that Kevin Willard, his consistency, especially with Mom, really resonated. So like you said, Mason, it's a waiting game to see when he announces, and until then, there's nothing that Maryland is going to say or do anything differently. And seems like it's kind of Maryland, Indiana, even though Queen has that top four with Houston, Kansas rounding out his top group as well. So again, we shall see when he officially pulls the trigger.
Yeah, flipping it over to football, Ahmed, another week, another offensive line decommit, but Terps possibly with some good news on the way in terms of their O-line.
Yeah, I mean, Samir Camacho, you mentioned this after Donovan Thompson, the Georgia tackle, after he decommitted as well. But think that both sides are going to be okay on this. Camacho committed to Maryland over Duke, UTSA in the spring, in the summer, went public in late August. And I will say, I mean, there were a couple of comments that I heard that it kind of made me seem like was kind of unsure if Camacho was even going to sign at Maryland. And if he did sign at Maryland, I'm not sure if he was going to make it for a full season at Maryland. So I think Maryland on that front is going to be okay. But it is the second offensive lineman to technically decommit these last couple of weeks. But I expect Maryland to kind of get some news. Could be as soon as tonight, could be as soon as tomorrow, could be potentially next week. But I expect Maryland to be able to rebound with another local target at the same position. So offensive line continues to be a big focus for Maryland this cycle. Have 6 linemen currently committed: Terez Davis, Ryan Howerton. Those guys lead the way. Might have an update on Terez Davis later this week as well. But definitely, I think Maryland will ultimately sign the guys that they have committed. I think they'll be able to hang on and sign the guys they want to.
Yeah, and you can always hear those things first if you're a subscriber on InsideTheBlackAndGold.net. Ahmed always keeps Inside the Bag going nonstop on InsideTheBlackAndGold.net. He's got all of the updates on there. Ahmed, anything else to add on the pod tonight?
I said it last week, Mason. It would be really cool to cover a win this weekend. So I think Maryland should just do that.
Yeah, I certainly will agree with you there. Post-game pod, as always, after the game on Saturday, which is noon here on Peacock. Terps obviously playing their first game on Peacock, as I so gracefully mentioned earlier in the podcast. As always, like this show. If you like it, subscribe to us wherever you get it. And thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.